Welcome back. As Minnesota and Wisconsin both sizzle in this heat wave, a reminder that sunscreen is super important. But which kind you use is equally important. A recent study shows that a connection between sunscreens and leukemia potentially. Tonight I talked to Dr. Elizabeth Farhat, a dermatologist with Allina Health. She has some advice on which products to use and how to stay safe in the sun. So we know there's this new study that shows the concerning link between popular sunscreen products and benzene, which we know is highly carcinogenic. So tell us a little bit more about these study results.
Yeah, so there was an independent group called Valisure, and they tested hundreds of sunscreens, and they did find elevated levels of benzene in a handful of the sunscreens. And this is very concerning because benzene is a known carcinogen. And so I definitely recommend checking out their website to see which sunscreens were affected. The trouble is it was a manufacturing issue, so there's not one brand or one type of sunscreen that we can just avoid because it was multiple sunscreens across multiple brands, and we definitely do not want to be applying sunscreen that has those high levels of benzene in it.
Yeah, let's talk about how benzene would even get into a product, because it's my understanding, I mean, this is not a product that people would intentionally add. Something happened along the way, right?
Absolutely. So benzene is a chemical that it's used in a lot of manufacturing. It's used in resins and glues. It's most commonly found in gasoline. The reports of it becoming carcinogenic are in oil rigs, auto shop workers, people who are breathing in the chemical benzene, but it is present in cigarette smoke. All sorts of products can emit benzene, but it should not be found in sunscreen.
Yeah. So we don't have any hypothesis as to like how that even happens. We're just calling it a manufacturing issue for now.
That is what they think. It's from whatever manufacturing plants are making the sunscreen, unfortunately.
Let's dig into the risk a little bit more, because we know more about benzene as a carcinogen. I mean, what types of, you said types of cancers, what types of cancers is it known to cause?
So the good news is there is no reports or links of sunscreen causing any type of cancer. So that is the great news. The types of exposures that would lead to cancer, they classify as long-term high volumes of benzene. So when I looked at some studies, they said greater than 10 years of exposure is long-term. And so there are no links of this amount causing cancer, especially those leukemias that we're seeing with those people working in those high exposure, 10 years or longer, oil rigs, things like that.
Let's talk about, I know there's discussion around, an FDA recall, and there's calls for that. How complicated is it to get the FDA to recall, especially several products?
We do think that there probably will be specific recalls for those specific products that were affected. The nice thing is that there are a ton of sunscreens out there that were not affected, and so you really can continue to safely use sunscreen, especially on these really hot days that we're having.
Yes, obviously we want to be using sunscreen on days like today, and there are still a lot of safe options. So what should we look for on the label?
I have you look for the physical sunscreens. So those are the ones with titanium dioxide or zinc oxide. A lot of those are in the baby sunscreens or the sensitive skin sunscreens. I have a few examples here that I just pulled off my shelf, some Blue Lizard, Baby Ganex, but there's a ton of over-the-counter ones that are very safe to use. And typically it's better to try the creams or lotions over the spray sunscreen.
Any ingredients that we're trying to avoid specifically, or not really with this particular issue?
Not really. So there are some ones that have those avobenzones, etc., that are still safe to use. So I don't think that there's one ingredient, unfortunately, that you can really look for. But if you check the list, there's very specific ones that we're testing positive.
Okay, you brought up a baby sunscreen. Can adults use baby sunscreen?
Absolutely. So they just label it baby so that people feel better about using it on their kids, but it's the same as the sensitive skin sunscreens actually. So it just has the least amount of additives and the least amount of extra things that are put into it. So it's very safe to use.
That sounds like the kind of sunscreen I want to be using. So that's kind of interesting. Any other tips for protecting ourselves against the sun, out in the heat all summer? Any other tactics besides the lotions that you would recommend?
Well, my favorite thing is sun protective clothing. I brought a few examples to show you as well. So these actually have UPF built into the fabric. So you can just put this on. You don't have to reapply every 2 hours like you do with sunscreen. I also, I have tons of sun protective clothing. I also love sun hats. So just that wide brim hat, that'll keep you protected. So if you don't want to use any sunscreen, if you actually can get yourself protected with sun protective clothing, sunglasses are always very important, and staying in the shade, avoiding sun from 10 to 2. Those are the tips I recommend.
Baby sunscreen, you guys, who knew? You'll find the latest on the heat wave and places to cool off at WCCO.com. We'll be right back.